Thurston, you're in this class too?
Yeah.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All right. Well, we'll wait. 4 more minutes. Welcome, Corey. One more. Is everybody's last class today? Did y'all have lunch? Getting that sleepy feeling? Let's see if I can accelerate the process. Lunch and then a research class, that's brutal. Your footsteps. All right, well, close enough.
Sure been good weather for January. All right, here we go.
Welcome to Research Methods. Hope the semester's starting off well for you. Just wanted to go over the course outline today and then probably about half of chapter 1. So for this class, as well as other classes that you might have before, and most of you have had at least once, except you. What's your name?
Jane.
Jane, okay, easy to remember. All right, so everything's organized into folders. You'll have your, course outline. Now, that may change a little bit over the course of the semester. So there's a tentative plan, but it may change a little bit. So check for updates always. PowerPoint presentations, we'll have class assignments, and then sample research proposals. So your first big assignment is your research proposal. So that'll be due just before spring break. So you'll have that, and then nice relaxing spring break week, and then come back and you'll start on your data collection. So hopefully the work that you do in this class will lead over to your thesis. Some of you may not be doing a thesis, a lot of you will be. So that's ACT 499. That's usually the capstone part of your degree. So the efficient way to do things is to do your proposal, or at least a rough draft in this class, do a small pilot study, and then you'll have kind of an idea what to do for a thesis. And thesis, we polish things up. So we take what you did in this class, we make it better, polish it up, and turn it into a thesis. Sometimes it's publishable. So Corey, one of your teammates, Dom, I'm not sure, his is currently under consideration for publication. So sometimes we get really good ones that are worthy of publication, and so we want to get our name out there in our program. So, but please don't feel like that publication is the end goal. The end goal is to have the experience of doing a research study. Okay, so course outline. I have office hours just before this class, so please come by. If you see me in there, door shut, knock, you're always welcome. Monday and Wednesday, I also have office hours from 10 to 12. Then I'm around a little bit on Fridays as well, usually Friday morning. So if you have any questions. I do use the textbook, especially when we're starting to get into statistical analyses. My goal in this class is to teach you how to do your own stats for your project. So we go over lots of things from correlations to different types of t-tests, all the way through one-way ANOVAs. I think we do two-way ANOVA as well as repeated ANOVA. So we go quite a bit into the analysis process. And so we do use the textbook. Use book is fine, but I do use it, refer to it. So we use probably 3/4 of the chapters in this textbook. So if money's a problem, just pull your resources and buy one so you can get your hands on it if you need to for different chapters. So the other thing is I focus a lot on the applied. So I don't want to talk about a bunch of theoretical concepts without you coming out of this class not being able to do a stats analysis. So that's where the Microsoft Excel comes in. So I'll actually put analyses during class, and you'll have the opportunity to do those yourself. So it's a hands-on experience. It's real data. I have a whole storage of data from old studies that I pull from that we can use for analyses. So I want you to actually get in and have the hands-on part, being able to do your own analyses, determine what the correct analysis is, and also being able to interpret it. So you hear this term significance. And what does that mean? Hi, Jackie. Have a seat. So you'll learn about what significance means, what power means, why do we value effect sizes, sample size, all those important things that go into it. So you need to have a laptop or other device, and you need to have Excel because we'll do analyses right in class, and that's worth participation points. So for exams, you'll also be asked to do analyses as part of an exam where you'll need Microsoft Excel. So please make arrangements so you have Excel ready to go for future classes. We'll give you a few weeks if you don't have it. We won't start with Excel stuff probably for about 3 weeks. So prepare yourselves accordingly. So this class is divided into modules. Basically, it's just a progression going from a discussion about what research is, and then gradually going into different types of research, and then getting into how to plan your own study, and then how to analyze the data. So about late March, I'm hopeful that you'll be mostly done with your data collection. It'll be just a few participants. You don't need to go through the whole IRB process like you will with your thesis. It's just a simple class project to get an idea of what your results might be with a thesis. And so please try to be here, attend, turn in your assignments on time, all of that. Grading, straight percentage, points you earn divided by the points possible. I do take some subjective things into that. If you attend, if you participate, have a good attitude, you've made a consistent improvement over time, those things, happy to bump you up to a higher grade. So these are the things. There'll be 3 exams plus a final, lots of in-class work to demonstrate concepts, your research proposal, your pilot study, and your research presentation. So there's not a final paper. Your final paper will come, the idea is your final paper will be your thesis when you progress to that, if you're required to take thesis. But you'll get your proposal, and then you'll get feedback on that from me, and then you'll do a pilot study, and then you'll report your findings to the class right at the end of the semester. So you won't be turning in a final paper, but you will be reporting what your findings were. Okay, so exams and so on, remember Excel is going to be good to have. As preparation for research, all students are required to complete the city certification. Can't recall what that stands for, but something important. But you do need to complete it. Okay, so you have these two links to walk you through that process. You have a few weeks to get that done. We'll go over those steps soon, not today, but in a future class period on how to get in there and do that. Maybe, how many of you have already done that as part of a different class? Okay, so we'll all do that together. I think your certification is good for 3 years. So get it done once and then you'll have to do it again. Okay, so research proposal. We will talk about all of this stuff. So you look at all this and say, how in the world am I going to do that? Well, that's what we're here for. We're going to talk about it. So just your basic introductory things: title page, table of contents, abstract, introduction, all of the things that should be included in your introduction. So these are subsections within your introduction. So the reason I post sample papers is because each of those papers has all of these sections that you need, so you can see an example. You'll do a literature review. You'll do your methodology. Okay, so that's how you plan to conduct your study. So it's very systematic. So there's a series of steps to this process. It's not just spontaneously coming up with things to do. You'll have some steps. So selecting your population and all of these other things, equipment, what analyses you plan on doing. For this pilot study, you'll probably just report means and standard deviations because it's so small that it's really more of an observational type study. But your stats analysis will come in later as you go on and do a full thesis. Then your references here. So here's some links to help you with all those things. There's some requirements on references in terms of original investigations versus literature reviews, books, and online sources. So we'll talk about what all of those things are, clarify what those types of references are. So then your pilot study comes in next. Should involve a minimum of 3, but not more than 8. Okay, so keep it within the scope of this class, and then have the idea in mind that a lot of you are going to be taking the next step into a thesis. So that would be the next logical step. Most of the data, we have nice labs downstairs, 132, 134. Those rooms, those are set up so you can collect your data. Don't necessarily need to be in there to collect data. Some of you might prefer more of a field setting. So that's why we need to talk about things right away to kind of get you thinking about what you'd like to do. The sooner you decide on what you're doing, the better. So we can make plans, because reservations have to be made so that we can have space at certain times. Okay, and then the very last thing will be your presentation. So you'll stand up here and talk for 15 minutes about all of those things from the literature, what your hypotheses were, your methods and results, all those things. And then we'll ask you questions. So a little bit of pressure, it's a good thing. Okay, and that's it. So as you can see here, this is a tentative outline where I think will be. So we've got chapter 1, get through most of chapter 1 today, maybe not all of it. Chapter 2 next week. The third week of the semester, we're going to have a guest speaker. So you need to know that Tyree prefers to have us go to the library. So just on that day, we'll meet at the same time, but we'll just go to library 302 for that. So she's very good. It'd be awesome if you could come with your topic in mind. Come prepared with questions. She'll show really just extensively how to use the library and electronic resources. So I hate to tell you one of these stories, but when I was your age, how I did my research projects, I usually took 2 pockets full of dimes, and then I went to the library all day on Saturday, and then I would search the stacks and find these copies of periodicals, and then I would make copies for papers. So things are much easier today where most things you can get full text electronically, and it's a lot easier, so you're not in the library all day Saturday making copies for your paper. Okay. Exam 1, February 14th, chapters 1, 2, 5. And then your city certificate is due. So again, we'll go over soon how to get in there. If you want to search that site and just kind of get familiar with it, that'd be okay. Research proposal due just before spring break. So how many of you, by the show of hands, kind of have an idea? Yes? Yes? Okay. Good. So you need to be thinking about what you'd like to do. Don't try to solve all the HHP problems in one study. So just, keep it within the scope of this class. Something that you have an interest and passion for. Okay, March 16th, exam 2, 6, 7, 8. I am requiring that you do an informed consent. Okay, so you won't go through the full IRB review. That's a lot, but you will do an informed consent just for practice. We'll talk about what that involves. And then exam 3, couple class periods to finish your data collection. You can invite me to observe if you want, or help, or write things down. Be fun to watch you in action. And then you got your oral research presentations, and then the final exam. So chapter 17, selected comprehensive concepts. So you'll have an idea of what those comprehensive concepts are. So I'll let you know what to focus on for that. So any questions? Okay, all right. So point is, you should be starting to think about what you'd like to do for a project. Okay, all right. So let's jump into chapter 1. So introduction to research. So the nature of research. What does research mean to you? Kind of get a feeling of despair as you think about it. Okay. Yeah, collecting information. So yeah, it's a comparison. It's finding out answers to questions, looking at what's been done before, maybe seeing what could be done to fill gaps in the literature. So we're going to talk about the nature of research, unscientific versus scientific methods of problem solving, alternative models of research, types of research, so how to do a research study, and parts of a thesis. So Eric commented, any other thoughts on what the word research means? It's kind of, if you're having a conversation with someone and they say, well, the research says this, then you might pay more attention because research is a kind of a nice catchword. Question is whether they really know what they're talking about or not. It's a word that authorities use a lot, research. So the object of research, kind of what Eric was saying, is to compare how things are in reality versus how they might be. So that's your hypothesis. So what you think might happen. So how do you make a hypothesis? If you're thinking about a topic, how would you form your hypothesis? Your theory about what might happen with an experiment. What would you base your hypothesis on, in other words?
Previous studies.
Yes, that's a big one. So if you read any scientific study, if you go through the introduction, guess what's included in the introduction? Heavy discussion on prior studies. And so right at the end of the introduction, after all this discussion of prior studies, then they state the hypothesis. So it usually goes something like this. So based on prior findings, we hypothesize that this is going to happen. So heavily based on what's been done before. So where you get an idea of what might happen. Okay, so you have typically an experimental group and a control group. Okay, so the experimental group gets the treatment. The control group doesn't do anything. So we have a control group because we want to see if there's any effect from the treatment. So our analysis determines whether that effect is great enough between the experimental group and the control group to be statistically significant. So there's that other word that we'll use a lot, significance. Has anybody heard of that in the context of research? Significance? Okay, well it's all based on probability. So the probability that your results were not due to chance. The probability that your results were not due to chance. So in HHP research, an acceptable level of probability is less than or equal to 0.05. So 0.05. So what that means literally is that we are saying that there is a 5% probability that differences between the experimental group and the control group were due to chance occurrence. So if you see that p less than or equal to 0.05, probability less than or equal to 0.05, what we're saying is that there's a 5% probability that any differences between the experimental group and the control group were due to random occurrence. So that's kind of looking at the glass half empty. Looking at the glass half full, there's a 95% probability that what? The differences between the experimental group and the control group were real. Were real differences, that were true differences, that were not due to chance occurrence or measurement error, and so on. Okay, so what types of characteristics could we assess over time in HHP type research? What do we track over time? So pre-test, mid-test, post-test, sometimes just pre and post. What types of things do we look for changes in? In very practical applied type research, what do we look for? What are the things we measure? Yeah, performance. Performance in what? Yeah, VO2, okay. Oxygen consumption, strength. Do we jump? Do we ever jump in HHP? A little bit. Okay, we jump, we sprint, we lift, we throw. These are all things that we track over time. These are all things that we could potentially design an experiment with a treatment group who receives this experimental condition and another group that does not, and then compare to see if there's a difference due to the treatment over time that exceeds random chance. Okay, so this is where we get to longitudinal versus cross-sectional designs. Okay, so if we're following a group of people over time, that's longitudinal, over a long period of time. One of the drawbacks of sports science in the United States is that most studies are about 16 weeks if they're longitudinal. Anybody know why? Or can you guess why? Most of the sports science longitudinal studies are about 16 weeks. How long is a semester? 16 weeks. Where are most of the sports science studies conducted in the United States? Right here, in colleges and universities. that have HHP programs. That's right. So that's one of the drawbacks. Is it possible to change our bodies beyond 16 weeks? I would certainly hope so. Wouldn't it be discouraging if 16 weeks, okay, that's it. Your body's done changing. Yeah. Okay. So how do we get around that? Well, there's the cross-sectional design. Cross-sectional is looking at things at a moment in time. Let's go back. Okay. Versus comparing groups at a moment in time. So with a cross-sectional design, we're looking at, say, different populations. Distinct populations. Populations that we can say have some unique feature. Or in HHP, we could say different populations that might have a certain way of training over a long period of time. So if you can get, say, maybe 2 or 3 groups, and they might be the same in some ways, but they also could be unique in certain ways. And we collect these people because they've been practicing a certain training method over a long period of time, maybe over several years. And so rather than tracking these people over additional time, what we do is we measure them for certain characteristics. So one example comes to mind. Okay, so we could collect a group of power lifters, we could collect a group of bodybuilders, and we could collect a group of Olympic weightlifters. Okay, so there's 3 populations: bodybuilders, powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters. Okay, now the training practices of all 3 of these groups. Is there things that are somewhat similar? Yeah. Are there things that are somewhat unique, do you think? Yeah, definitely. Okay, so what we could do is measure something like vertical jump. Okay, we could measure vertical jump in groups of experienced bodybuilders, powerlifters, and Olympic weightlifters. What are the 3 lifts that are contested as part of powerlifting? Do we know? I'll save that comment. Okay, so powerlifting, barbell bench press, deadlift, what else? Back squat. Okay, so those 3. And it's your total. Okay, so Olympic weightlifting. Snatch. What's the other one? Clean and jerk, right? And bodybuilding is more about appearance. Okay, so there's no test of fitness with that. Okay, so, but there's similar aspects to all 3 of those lifting-related disciplines. Okay, but there's also some unique features as well. So we assess vertical jump in long-term people in each of those 3 groups. So we find out by assessing vertical jump in those 3 groups that the Olympic weightlifters tend to have the highest vertical jumps. That's a cross-sectional design. We're measuring vertical jump at a moment in time among different groups. Isn't that easier than following these people over years and years and years? Some of these people have been training consistently for 20 years. Okay, so longitudinal does have its advantages, but what's the disadvantage of longitudinal research? It does. Following up with people, epidemiological research. People, you know what the end point of the study is for epidemiological research? Kind of depressing. People die. That's the end point for an epidemiological study, is mortality is the end point. So people are followed for several years, sometimes decades. So you are in direct contact with these people, which is an advantage. Okay. You can maybe have a little more control over the treatment and the training method and so on. What's the advantage of cross-sectional? Less time, yes. You don't have to really control the training method, right? You can look at, okay, well, you can do a survey and say, okay, what have you guys been doing? What have you guys been doing? What have you guys been doing? What would you say are things that are similar? What would you think things that are unique? Okay, and so you, just as an example, you say, okay, well, the Olympic lifters, they tend to jump higher. So what can we get out of that study then? What would the take-home message be? Yeah, if you want to jump high, what should you do? Olympic lifts and variations, right? That's the simple take-home message. If you have these athletes that are doing these certain types of lifts for several years and they tend to be jumping really high, well, maybe there's a cause and effect to relationship there. Colorado Springs is where the Olympic Training Center is. Guess which group of athletes has the highest average vertical jump out of all the teams? And it's not basketball. It's the Olympic weightlifting team. So, true. So we can get a lot out of that, can't we? We can say, well, what are these people doing? There must be something that they're doing that makes them jump really high. So then we look at that and we borrow from that and we say, well, maybe other athletes can benefit from what they're doing. If other athletes are required to jump really high, maybe we can take what they're doing and apply it in some way. So that's the benefit of cross-sectional design. So does everybody understand longitudinal versus cross-sectional? Okay, great. All right, so 5 characteristics of research. It's systematic. We record and write down everything. So everything is planned out prior to the whole process. So nothing is left to chance. You want to try and control as much as you can. So you plan it, and you're going to go through that process of planning. Okay, so you need to identify what your variables are going to be, what your treatment is going to be, what your population is. That's all involved in the design, and then you collect your data. After you collect your data, you evaluate it. So you try to get meaning out of the data. Because really the bottom line with research is we want to be able to use it. So isn't that really the purpose of doing it? Is doing something that's useful to help society or specific segments of society live better lives. Or in HHP, it's better athletes, it's injury prevention, all those types of things. So there has to be a reason behind research more than just sitting on a shelf collecting dust. So I think too often that's what happens. Okay, logical. So you examine the procedures in order to evaluate your conclusions. Okay, empirical. Okay, so experience goes into this process. So what experiences do you have that inform your idea on a topic? Reductive. So what relationships can be established from the data? So this is where we get into correlations, positive and negative associations between different variables. So establishing relationships is the first step in getting towards cause and effect. So just because two things are associated doesn't necessarily mean one causes the other, but it's a good initial step. And then replicable. Why is that important? So if you choose to do a study here at MSUB, and then somebody else wants to do the same study to repeat it at MSU Bozeman, you got to have everything written down, right? So that they're able to repeat your procedures. Because the more often something is repeated with the same results, we can be more confident that those findings are true or beyond chance occurrence. So why don't you just read this paragraph with me here. Problem solving is accomplished through identification and labeling of variables, and is followed by design of research that tests the relationships among these variables. Data are then collected when related to the variables that allow the evaluation of the problem and hypothesis. Okay, so we need to know what variables are. So what variables do we include in research, and how does one affect the other? So a variable is defined as anything that has quantity or quality that may vary over time. So these are things that we're recording as part of data collection. So we have independent variables. These are sometimes called the experimental or treatment variable. So the independent variable is what affects the dependent variable. Dependent variable is the outcome. So the independent variable is what is being manipulated. Okay, so you do a study to look at different training intensities on VO2 max. So a study examining the association between, a study examining the effect of exercise intensity on VO2 max. So VO2 max is your outcome. That's your dependent variable. Whereas training intensity is your independent variable. So we might have multiple conditions within the independent variable. So for example, we might have 60% of heart rate max compared with 80% of heart rate max. So the overall independent variable is intensity, but then we can have different conditions, different intensities within that independent variable. So then we compare 60% heart rate max versus 80% heart rate max on our outcome. So the outcome is the change in VO2. How much change did you get in your ability to consume oxygen? So one of the things that always enters into this, in being confident that our results were not due to chance or error, is the effect of confounding variables. What does it mean to confound something in a general sense? To confound something. Interfere with it or make it difficult to see the truth, okay? That's what confounding variables are. So in a study like this where we're looking at different exercise intensities, what else would we want to control for? Besides just having someone being at 60% of heart rate max or 80% of heart rate max for the duration of their workout. What else would we want to control for? Yes? Okay, good. What else? Yes? Yeah, all those things. What about duration? So the volume of training has to be controlled for, right? Okay, because volume can enter into it and be a confounder. So what if the 60% group is doing twice the volume as the 80% group? And then the 60% group has better results in terms of their VO2 max. Well, how can you conclude that 60% intensity is the best for improving VO2 max if the 60% group was doing twice the volume? So volume would be a confounding factor in that conclusion. So ideally, with an experiment, you want everything to be controlled except for that one experimental variable. So everything would need to be the same except the intensity. So the duration, the volume, the distance, whatever, it all needs to be the same except that one variable to make valid conclusions. So again, dependent variables is what we're measuring in response to the independent variable. Okay, so problems can come from a variety of sources. So from our experience. In this class, I'd like to use the word question synonymously with problem. So the research problem or the research question. Okay, so research questions or problems can be solved from many sources. So controversial issues in the field, testing theories, trying to improve present practice. Isn't this really valuable, trying to improve present practice? That's a key purpose of research. Why even do research at all if you're not trying to improve how things are presently done. If you look at something, could it be done better? Okay, well, that's the value of research. So HAP examples, just pulling off the top of my head. Fat loss methods, so manipulation of diet and exercise. There is a mountain of research papers on those two things alone, combining different macronutrient percentages and different forms of exercise, aerobic, anaerobic, high intensity interval training, sprint interval training, moderate intensity continuous training, goes on and on. So what's really nice is that some scholars are willing to write these literature reviews. So what's a literature review?
Looking at a bunch of different literature.
Yes. Takes a lot of time, right, to really do a good job. You take this mountain of papers and you try to synthesize it into one overall message. So that's really nice. So the #1 journal in our field is called Sports Medicine. And every month it publishes nothing but literature reviews. So maybe with your topic, you'll take note of that. It's the highest rated journal in the field. So if you get a paper in sports medicine, you know that your review was really good. And so we can take all of this overwhelming pile of research and we have it condensed into one paper with key points. So what's the take-home message? What has science found so far that can improve present practice? So dietary supplements, dosages, and so on. There's so much. I wish I just had time just to read all the research that's coming out, because every month there's just hundreds of new papers. So it's really hard to keep up with what's going on. So key issues with this. What were the measurement techniques? So if you're looking at a study that looked at fat loss, how were they measuring it? Okay, do we have methods of assessing fat loss that are perhaps more valid than others? Yeah, of course we do. So that has to do with validity. So validity can be likened to a target, and the bullseye is the true characteristic. That's the truth, is the bullseye. And so we want a measurement technique that hits right in the bullseye. Reliability is also important. What does reliability mean? Reliability. So someone's reliable. So after this class, you have a reliable person that's going to be waiting to give you a ride home. What does that mean? You can count on them. It's consistent, right? Consistency is really important. But can you be consistently inaccurate? Can you be consistently wrong? Can you have a nice pattern that's up here, close to each other, but far from the bullseye? Yeah. So we want consistently right in the bullseye. So that's both valid and reliable. Something else, verbal encouragement. You have to make a decision. That's pretty hard to control for. How do you give your participants consistent verbal encouragement? Pretty hard to say. So at this moment, on this exact repetition, I'm going to say, come on, right? I don't know. Is that a factor? If someone was over the top of you screaming at you, would you be more likely to get the weight up? Probably. Okay. But then should you just be sitting back stone-faced? Does that make a difference in your results over time? Yeah, that's a factor. Verbal encouragement. How do you control for that? Should you control for that? Okay. Degree of supervision. So that's important, that you can have all kinds of confounding variables enter in, especially with diet-related studies. Okay, so there's some really good ones out there where supposedly people had all their meals in a laboratory. So how would you like to be in that study? 3 times a day and 2 snacks between. You go into this building and you sit down and you have these controlled portions that have exact percentages of carbohydrates, fats, and protein, and you do that for 12 weeks. And then off to the side, there's another room where you do your exercise. and everything is controlled for. So what's the advantage of that type of study? Yeah, good conclusions, right? Really good conclusions. Assuming they're not going home and having a big bowl of Captain Crunch between, their meals and all that. But that increases your validity. Okay, so a lot of studies where there isn't as much funding, they're going to do self-report for diet. So that may reduce validity. Sometimes not, but you have to consider that things may not be as tightly controlled. Okay, so applied research, that's what I like. That's what most of the projects in our department involve is applied research, direct value to practitioners, but there is less or limited control over the research setting. So there's kind of a trade-off. In the real world, how well are things controlled? Not really, right? So, you could look at it that way too, is that if your procedures are conducted kind of with looser control, that might be more relevant to a real world type of setting versus where everything is tightly controlled. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at things. So applied versus basic research. Applied has a few different characteristics, addresses immediate problems or questions. Okay, uses so-called real-world settings. Uses human participants. Involves less control. Okay, so we stated that. Gives results that are of direct value to practitioners. Okay, on the other hand, basic research. This is foundational research. So a lot of the foundational research for HHP was done decades ago, especially in the 1970s. There's a lot of early research on muscle cells, on the nervous system. This is research that you can't directly apply. It's more foundational inquiry. So what are muscle cells? What makes muscle cells contract? What are the proteins inside muscle cells? How do those proteins change over time? Okay, laboratory setting, very tightly controlled, temperature, humidity, and so on. Frequently involves animals. I kind of cringe when I hear that, but it's true. Carefully controls conditions. May have limited direct application. So we're just getting some basic information. But it's important because that's the foundation, right? So you have your foundation and then you gradually build on that with more applied type questions. So you have to weigh the balance of both. So as stated here, the strengths of applied research are the weaknesses of basic and vice versa. Okay, so controversy exists as to whether research should be more basic or applied. I like the applied part because it's something that has direct value, something that can make the world better, can improve present practice. So this issue is labeled ecological validity. So it deals with two concerns. Is the research setting perceived by the research participant in the way intended by the experimenter? Second one, does the setting have enough real-world characteristics to allow for application of results? So most research incorporates elements of both. So here's a table from chapter 1 of your textbook. So I want you to take just a moment and just scan through the ultimate goal and the main approach to level 1 basic. So this is our foundational type of research. Level 2 applied. Level 3 applied. So I suspect most of the projects in this class will be over here. take just a moment and scan through all three of those. So as you read through those, you can see things are more general and non-specific over here, gradually getting into more of a real-world type specific questions that can be directly applied with the results. Okay, so that can be confusing just to read, so I thought I'd give you a few examples. So here's one example of basic research. So the effect of resistance training volume on skeletal muscle proteome. What's the proteome? Somebody Google proteome real quick. Proteome. What is a proteome? Definition of proteome. Let's figure this out. What'd you get? Anybody?
Says the entire complement of proteins that is or can be expressed by a cell, tissue, or organism.
Okay, so basically all the proteins in your body. There's a lot of them. That's the proteome. So this study looked at the effects of resistance training volume on proteins, all the proteins that are expressed in skeletal muscle cells. Okay, so this study utilized rats. Okay, so basic study, it was conducted by a couple of my friends down in Brazil, Tabana and Prestus. So here's the procedures. So let's read through this together. So how do you make rats do resistance training? So training sessions began 3 days following the familiarization protocol and involved 4 or 8 ladder climbs. Isn't that interesting? Ladder climbs, okay, with progressively heavier loads. Okay, so we're getting into it. The initial climb was equivalent to 75% of the body mass. That's interesting. Subsequently, an additional 30-gram weight was added until the load was reached at which the animal could not climb the entire ladder. Okay, failure was determined when the animal could not complete the ladder climb with 3 consecutive stimuli to the tail. So, animal research. So I'm sorry, just trying to present an example here. So they were basically stimulating the tail to get the animal to climb the ladder. Okay, so the greatest load successfully carried the entire ladder length was deemed the maximal carrying capacity for that training session and used to calculate training load for the next session. Training sessions for this was 4 ladder climbs, consisted of a total of 4 ladder climbs, increasing intensity to 50%, 75%, 90%, 100% of maximal carrying capacity. The RT, so the 8 ladder climbs, they did 2 climbs at each intensity, so 4 times 2 is 8. Okay. The total volume of training was adapted from a previous study. Okay, so underlined in red here, here's what they found. Approximately half the muscle fiber protein content is related to the contractile mechanism. Okay, so half the proteins in a muscle cell are involved with muscle contraction. That's a useful finding, I think. Okay. So, And the high volume of these proteins produce considerable difficulties in detecting and quantifying proteins that were less abundant. So in other words, such as signaling proteins, transcription factors, and mitochondrial proteins. So that's basic research. Is this applicable? Can you apply it? No, it's foundational type research. So it gives you these little tidbits, these little pieces of information, like half of the proteins in a muscle cell are involved with producing muscle contraction. There's a lot of other proteins in the cell that are involved with other things as well. Okay, so here's the backstory to this one. So I've been to Brazil several times, spoken at conferences there. This was 2015 in Brazil. There's me. That's what, 8 years ago? Obrigado, that means thank you. Where's Tabana? Tabana's right here. Prestis is right here. So these are some of the best sports scientists down in Brazil. So this was in Rio between talks. I was getting nervous for my presentation because I don't speak Portuguese. So I had to have an interpreter. So I was out walking around and there was this outdoor gym. So I decided to do some pull-ups kind of in downtown Rio. This is right by the beach if you were to go this way. So I stayed with Tabana for a while. This is Brasilia. Brasilia is the capital city of Brazil. So this is Tabana, and we're out here at the track. This is a park in the middle of Brasilia. This was in like late November. So they're out, the grass is green, they're out playing volleyball in late November. This is at the Central Catholic University of Brasilia. This is their HHP building right here. So there's a little courtyard here, and this is where students take classes that are like what we do in this building. So same thing, just different language. So kind of a fun trip. Okay, so basic research. So what's level 2 applied research? So we're getting more towards practical application here. So here's an example of another study. This was another one that I helped with down in Brazil. Short recovery augments magnitude of muscle damage in high responders. Okay. So how many of you have ever experienced muscle soreness following a workout? Yes. Okay. So the intent with this study is to see if some people are more sensitive to muscle soreness than others. So the question, the research problem, research question, does muscle soreness vary between individuals of the same training status that do the same workout? So if you take a group of people that have the exact same training status, are some people going to be more sensitive to muscle soreness than others? So just in your experience, do you have some muscles that tend to get more sore than others? So yeah, even within the same individual, you can have muscles that tend to get really sore and others that don't. And then you can have a lot of variability between individuals. So what is it that actually produces soreness when you work out? So when you work out, you can have just a little bit of microtrauma. You can have a little bit of tearing in the muscle fiber membranes. Okay, so that invokes this immune response that places pressure on pain receptors. And so that's what creates soreness. And so you have indirect markers for the extent of muscle damage, such as creatine kinase. So creatine kinase is an enzyme inside muscle cells. And so if you have microscopic little tears in muscle membranes, you're going to have some of this creatine kinase escape into the bloodstream. So you can get a general idea of the extent of damage by looking at creatine kinase levels at different time points following a workout. So 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. And the time course of reductions in creatine kinase kind of corresponds with how the soreness response goes from the peak down to where soreness is kind of going away. So that's what we tried to do. So it was just a simple full body 1 versus 3 minute rest intervals between sets, 3 sets of 10. Repetition speed was controlled. And then we looked at creatine kinase activity. Okay, so what's the independent variable here? Independent variable.
1 versus 3.
Yes, exactly, Drew, good. So rest interval was the independent variable. So how many conditions within the independent variable? 2. So there's 2 conditions within the overall independent variable. So the effective rest interval on the creatine kinase response. So then your dependent variable would be the creatine kinase. So the creatine kinase response based on the rest interval between sets. So everybody in the study did both conditions. So they did the same workout with either 1 or 3 minute rest between sets. So everyone does both, and then we look at the creatine kinase response. Okay, so how do you define a high responding person? Someone that gets super sore after a workout. So our definition was high responding subjects were classified based on serum creatine kinase activity being in the 90th percentile. So after both workouts, 1 minute between sets, 3 minutes between sets, their creatine kinase levels had to be, so 1 minute, 500, greater than or equal to 556.2 units per liter, and then you can see the 3 minutes over here. So to be classified as high responding, you had to meet both of these criteria. And so 7 out of the 32 were classified as high responding. So that means you take a big group of people, all of them have the same training status, similar as possible in training background and as many factors, and you have 7 out of those 32 that are exhibiting this elevated creatine kinase response, irrespective of rest interval. So that's about a little less than 25%. So that's really interesting. So the other thing is that we control for volume. So despite clear differences in serum creatine kinase responses, the HR and NR, so high responding and low responding or non-responding groups did not differ in the volume completed. So they were doing the same exact volume, but one group tended to be a lot more sensitive and expressed a lot more muscle soreness as evident by their creatine kinase values. So you take that and you think, what's the take-home message? Remember, it's applied level 2. And we say, well, some people get more sore than others. Yeah, we know that. So which workout's more likely to cause muscle soreness? 1 minute or 3 minutes? That's where we get to this graph right here. So if you're a high responding person and you're doing 1 minute between sets, that's going to produce a big creatine kinase response, especially at about 48 hours is where we see the peak. So tracking 24, 48, 72 hours. Okay, so what this says is muscle soreness can be a combination of how much rest between sets and how sensitive you are. So what goes into that? Sensitivity. Let's open that box. What's that G word? Genetics. Do we know all those things yet? That's more research right there. That's basic research. So why is it that their muscle cells express greater soreness than other people? That's a whole other question. So we know that they do, but now we got to figure out why. Okay, level 3 applied. So yay, we made it, right? This is the type of research that we do mostly in this department. So things that can improve present practice, direct application. Okay, So I picked one here. I'm thinking of Corey on this one. So rotational medicine ball throw velocity relates to NCAA Division III college baseball player bat swing, batted baseball, and pitching velocity. So this is a study that is descriptive. We're looking at associations. Does association imply cause and effect? No, so I said that earlier, but it's the first step. It's the first step. So we had some different tests as part of this study. So they did rotational medicine ball wall throws. And they measured how fast the ball was traveling when it left their hands. So they knew how fast they could throw a baseball, they knew how fast they could swing a baseball bat, and then they looked at these three other tests, these three other performance tests. So how fast they could throw this medicine ball, so rotational medicine ball throw velocity test. So you can see there the description. And then they did some other tests. So lateral to medial hop for distance test. So what's the correlation between performance on this lateral hop test and pitching velocity and bat swing velocity? They also did just your basic standing broad jump. And then they looked at that association. So one of the earliest chapters in this textbook, we will look at correlations. So the initial step in establishing cause and effect. And so we can make tables that show these relationships. So looking at the relationship, these Pearson product moment relationships. So that's what you'll learn how to calculate, the Pearson product moment correlation. So these measures maximal pitching velocity, maximal bat swing velocity, maximal batted ball velocity. So these are all things that I'm sure Corey tracks. You have one of those things that goes on the end of the bat.
I don't think so.
Yeah, you remember Dom had one of those? That's what.
Goes on like the knob.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe, I don't know, I'll have to look to see how exactly they were measuring the bat swing stuff. But this is how fast you throw, and then this is how fast you swing a bat, and this is how fast the ball comes off the bat. So important variables for baseball players, right? And then they looked at the association with rotational medicine ball wall throw velocity, lateral to medial hop, and two-legged standing broad jump. So what did we say the most common level of probability was to establish statistical significance? What did we say that was for HHP? 0.05. So I want you to take a look here. You got your p-values there. So let's see. The correlation between maximal pitching velocity and rotational medicine ball throw velocity. Was it significant? Yes. P is equal to 0.02. Is that less than 0.05? Yeah. So that's a significant relationship. That's a significant association. So how fast this group were able to throw a baseball was associated with their medicine ball wall throw velocity. Okay, so you take a look here, maximal bat swing velocity, rotational medicine ball throw velocity. So significant? Yes, less than 0.05. Okay, medicine ball and bat coming off the, or ball coming off the bat speed. Okay, yeah, significant. Okay, so you take a look at some of these other p-values here. So anything here that you see is significant? Nothing there. What about over here? Nothing here. Okay, so does lack of statistical significance mean lack of practical significance? That's a good question. Lack of statistical significance, does that mean a lack of practical significance? And you're absolutely right. So if I told you that you would jump 2 inches higher by including this little bit of extra exercise after 1 month, would you do it? Even if it wasn't statistically significant, but it was 2 inches, would you do it? Most people would, right? Yeah. Because when you get to this level where it's college athletes and even higher professional athletes, you want every little bit of advantage. So that's what we need to talk about. Lack of statistical significance doesn't necessarily indicate lack of practical significance. So something can still have meaning and something can still be worth doing despite a lack of statistical significance. So we have other measures that we take, such as effect size, where you can actually see the magnitude of effect. So how are we doing on time? Okay, let me go for a few more minutes. So the point with research is don't focus too much on the stats and significance. Focus on the take-home message. So make your own decisions. If something is not shown to be significant in one study, does that mean it's not going to be significant in another study? No. Okay, for various reasons. The population used, the way that testing was done, the instrumentation used to take measures. Okay, so one study is like a snapshot in an entire photo album. So to get the take-home message, you've got to get the whole album, right? You can't just look at one study. That's why literature reviews are so useful. So in terms of just, if you were to read that, what would you think? What's the take-home message? Yeah, so maybe, Corey, maybe you want to do a few medicine ball throws, right? You probably already do those to death. So yeah, because that's associated with all these things that are important for baseball. Simple. So it's a simple take-home type of message. Okay, so I want you to take a moment and read through this from your chapter 1, page 6. Kind of interesting how we feel about research, right? Very important. Is there a purpose behind your research? Make it useful for practitioners. So, how can we make research more usable? So, what is your drawbacks to reading studies? So, what is the, I guess, what would make you hesitate from opening a journal and reading something? Okay, a lot of it maybe has to do with the wording. Okay, what about the statistical section? Okay, trying to understand that. So my goal here is to help you with that, help you come to conclusions. I want you to be more simple in the way that you write. I think a lot of times researchers are famous for using $3 words when a nickel word would do, so to speak. So don't use flowery type of writing, just very basic is preferred. So for example, rather than saying at this point in time, you say now. Straightforward, okay? Initiate is a $3 word. Start is a nickel word. Okay, terminate, say end. Chemotherapeutic agent. Just say drug instead, right? So make it understandable, easier to read, user-friendly. Be straightforward in the way that you write. So one of the biggest stumbling blocks is the statistical analysis. So try to read through that. This is in your textbook. One of the biggest drawbacks. So the tetrachoric correlations among the test variables were subjected to a centroid factor analysis. I don't know if I can get all the way through that paragraph. So, until simple structure and positive manifold were closely approximated. So the primary purpose of this class is to help you be more comfortable reading research. So how to read research. Pick a few publications. What are some publications that you know about? So what are some publications maybe that you've read? Yes, Journal of Sports Medicine. It's a good one. Lots of journals out there. Any others? Okay, well, you'll be familiar with them by the end of this class. Okay, keep in mind that no single study is proof. So you have to study and say, this is proof. Okay, well, no, you have to verify it multiple times before it constitutes knowledge. So the whole photo album. Okay, so read the abstract first. The beauty of the abstract is you get the take-home message. You don't have to dig through the whole thing. If you want to dig through the whole thing, you can, but it's really easy to get the rundown just by reading through the abstract. Guess what? A lot of times in the last line of the abstract is the best part to read. A lot of times if I'm looking through a journal and I see a title that sounds interesting to me, I'll go to the last line of the abstract because that gives you the take-home message. In conclusion, and then gives you the take-home message right there. So don't be overly concerned with statistical significance. Okay, so look for the take-home message. Form your own opinions. Okay, so here's one very popular journal in our field, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So the way that I've set this up, you can click on it. Maybe. Here it comes. And so you have every month, you can click on this, and so our library is excellent. You have free access to all of this information. So there's 12 issues a year, one a month, and you can get the title of any of these. You can look through the title. If you want the abstract, you can see it here, okay, with the take-home message, these findings, and so on. Okay. All kinds of, the strength of this journal is that it's very practical. So there's some great applied information in here. Okay, so low load with BFR, what does BFR stand for? Blood flow restriction, right? So low load with BFR versus high load without BFR, eccentric hamstring training have similar outcomes on muscle adaptation. So just anything, any title that attracts your interest. So muscle hypertrophy is affected by volume load progression models. That's exciting. So you can then click on the abstract. Now, we do have free access, so I can show you how to do that. Let's take a couple of examples here on how to read the abstract. So let's take just this example from our PowerPoint. This was done a couple of years ago, January 2021. You can see up here the title, Activation of the Gluteus Maximus during performance of back squat, split squat, and barbell hip thrust, and the relationship with maximal sprinting. That's an interesting study. Why don't you go ahead, take a moment and read through the abstract, and then we'll talk about it. So this is from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So very much an applied type of journal. Okay, what'd you learn? How high of a load were they using? For the back squat, the split squat, and the hip thrust, how heavy? Gives it to you there. See if you can find it.
Equivalent to their individual 3 repetition.
Yes, 3 rep max. So is that heavy? Yeah, that's heavy. How much weight you can lift 3 times for each of those lifts. Okay, and then they looked at muscle activation. How many points on the gluteus maximus did they have electrodes? How'd you like to volunteer for that study? 2 electrodes on your glutes. Yeah, they had 2 upper and lower gluteus maximus. Okay, so was there a significant relationship between gluteus maximus activity and sprint speed? So how fast you can run? Yes, yes there was. So although ground reaction force is lower, peak EMG activity in the gluteus maximus was higher in the hip thrust and the back squat, okay, and split squat. Peak sprint velocity correlated with both anterior posterior horizontal force and peak ground reaction force during the barbell hip thrust. Okay, so take home message. Can you see how this is very applied? If you want to run really fast, what might be a good idea? You better be doing hip thrust. You get your speed from your glutes, right? So this is a study that has a very applied message. How can we improve present practice? Okay, so that's enough for today. So any questions? Okay, that's about half of chapter 3. So what you need to be doing between now and next Tuesday is kind of finalizing your research topic idea. So the sooner you can kind of settle on something, don't make it too complicated. Stick with simplicity. It's going to be better off for you as far as getting through this class well. All right, thank you.